first and foremost, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to come for Bloomington and Richfield. This is extremely important as we're getting this off the ground. And I also want to say thank you to Patty Piatz, our video producer of Republican Roundtable, who's putting this together this evening. So Patty, thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you for everyone just for being here. Now what I'm going to do is announce our speaker tonight. We have State Representative Mike Wiener, who represents the area of Wadena in northwestern Minnesota. And on a personal note, I always had to go to scout camp every summer, and then had to go to Wadena right after scout camp got out. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike at this time.
All right. Thanks, Rick. Good evening, everybody. I'm State Representative Mike Wiener, and my district is Todd County, Wadena County, a little bit of Morrison and Cass, but thank you for being here. This is important for our state, for our future. I'd never run for office before, and I'm sorry, I almost forgot Patty. Thank you, Patty, and the Republican Roundtable. Thank you, SD51, for putting this together. This is a great opportunity to bring outstate Minnesota together with the Metro. Governor Walz had a One Minnesota campaign to bring us all together. The legislation did not exemplify that at all. It was very Metro-centric, and it really minimized greater Minnesota. But we're all in this together. Whether you're in the Metro or outstate, we're all in this together. And there's an interesting fact that, I shouldn't say it's a fact, it's something somebody told me, that most of the people in the suburbs or Metro are probably not more than 2 to 3 generations away from the family farm in greater Minnesota. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, is there some truth to that? And I looked at my own aunts and uncles on both sides of the family. Very true. Every one of them grew up on the family farm. And every one of them now is living in the Metro with all of my cousins. So we are connected. This is not us versus them. This is one Minnesota that the governor campaigned on and then forgot about as soon as he got elected. So thank you for having me here tonight. A little bit of my own background. I am happily married. I've been married for, she's going to be mad at me, 23 years. My wife and I. This is one of my daughters, Marion. We have 9 kids together, my wife and I. And own a small business. We recycle waste wood. So what we do is we look for waste streams. We work with cabinet shops, pallet manufacturers, and we take that waste product and we process it. And it gets recycled and used for animal bedding, primarily large dairies, compost. So people say, you're a tree hugger. Yes, I am. I take a waste wood product and I make something useful out of it. And I think we put the reduce, reuse, recycle into action, where most of the time the progressives just talk the talk. We walk the walk. We make sure it happens. So we recycle literally thousands of tons of material every year. I had not planned on getting involved in politics. With redistricting this year, my wife and I wanted to get involved just to become delegates. We wanted to have a voice in who was going to represent us. That was the extent that I wanted to get involved. So we became delegates, went to the conventions and so forth, and with redistricting, we had no sitting House member. And I looked at my wife and I said, I think I'm going to run for office. And she said, are you serious? I said, as a heart attack. She said, what are your chances of winning? I said, not a hope in heck, but we're going to give it a shot, because I wanted to learn the system. And she says, well, why would you want to run? And I looked at my kids. What future am I going to live for them? My dad used to have a saying, you can't complain too much if you don't get involved. So usually when I was complaining about one thing or the other, he would say, can't complain too much if you don't get involved. So here I am, freshman legislator this year, in probably one of the craziest legislative sessions. According to senior legislators, lobbyists, people who have been involved for a long time, they all say the same thing. This is a session like they've never seen before. And I ask the question, why? The Democrats have had a trifecta in the past. What made this year different? In the past, what we saw is the Democrats had a mix. They had representation out in greater Minnesota as well as the metro. And it kind of balanced each other out because they wanted to protect their seats in greater Minnesota and in the metro. This year, if you look at the map, there is very few representatives, senators in greater Minnesota. So the legislation was focused, and when I say metro-centric, it was focused on the metro. And it really, like I said before, minimizes greater Minnesota. So a couple of the key issues that I saw were important for our area. I'm very much pro-life. And I always explain that it's not just a religious or a spiritual reason to be pro-life. Any country has to have a positive birth rate, 2.3 kids on average, in order to maintain their population. Since about late 70s, early 80s, we've had a negative birth rate in our country, which is a detriment to any, it's kind of like I like to compare things to business a lot. If a business isn't growing, it's dying. As a society, if we're not at least maintaining a population, we are going backwards. So if you look back at the 70s, John Ulrich had a book, The Population Bomb, and there was this fear that we were going to run out of resources because we were having too many kids. If you look at the demographics now, we're going backwards, not just in our country, but across the world. That's a detriment. So our kids, I was pro-life, I'm very much pro-Second Amendment. That was a big issue for us. And there again, I have to explain why. When I was trying to relate this to people in the metro, I said, you have to understand, we don't view guns the same as what you do. When you grow up out in the country, chances are you've got a cabinet there somewhere. Your dad, more often than not, is going to say, you know what, you're at this age, let's go out hunting. And he's going to teach you the safe manner, proper techniques, ethical hunting. And it was a building of tradition. And I thought, why is there such this disconnect between the metro and greater Minnesota when it comes to guns? I really started looking at it and I thought, because every time that there's a reference to a gun in the metro, it's a crime. But we don't view that way out there. To us, it's family. It's something that you pass down. When you're 12, 14 years old, Dad is gonna probably give you a firearm so that you can go hunting. Whether it's birds or deer or whatever. If nothing else, now my daughter's looking at me like, Dad, when's mine? Yeah. If nothing else, we do target practicing. You know, it's an enjoyable experience for us. Pizza's ready. Thanks, guys. Where was I? Second Amendment. I like history as well. Our founding fathers, the Second Amendment wasn't just for self-defense and hunting. When you looked at it, they broke away from England and they wanted to protect themselves from an oppressive government. And that was important, and I believe that history is important too. We've seen in other countries, and I'll use Ukraine as a prime example right now. When Russia started invading them, what did we do? We sent them firearms. We said, you need to be able to protect themselves. I hope we never get to that position where we have a country that invades us. But history teaches us some valuable lessons. You prepare for the worst, but you hope for the best. And I hope it never has to be that way. But that's why I'm very much Second Amendment. Taxes was another big reason I ran. In our area, aging population, as well as all of Minnesota, roughly 27% of our population, 28% depending upon where you're at, is elderly. It's this baby boomer generation, right? So my mom still lives on the family farm, that we call it. And if we hadn't bought the family farm, she wouldn't be able to live there. The property taxes have gotten more and more. She's on Social Security. Her income is limited. And that was the other thing that really bothered me, is taxation on Social Security. I looked at that and I thought, okay, why are we doing this? You get taxed on that to begin with. And then you get taxed on it again when you take it out. That's double taxation. Look at the way Social Security was started. It was meant to be supplementive when you get to your golden years. It wasn't taxed until about the 1980s. Actually, believe it or not, Ronald Reagan brought that issue up, because you got to remember the years and what we were going through. So there's this history again. I was pretty young. I barely remember the early 80s, but I do remember the farming issues that we had and the interest rates. There was a fear that Social Security could go bankrupt. So they started taxing the higher brackets to make sure that Social Security stayed around. So that was actually a Reagan proposal with there was a lot of support to it, but it was meant to be a temporary fix. We're one of only 11 states yet that tax Social Security. So this came up down on the floor, and I kind of thought it was comical when the Democrats are saying we need to maintain that tax on Social Security. I said, I love to hear that you guys are actually supporting a Reagan idea. I just wish you would, not support this Reagan idea. But that was another issue. When I look at our population, why are we taxing Social Security? So those are some of the big issues that I ran on. But now moving forward, we've seen this runaway legislation in the state. Bill after bill, which is supposed to go through various committees until it gets to the floor, sometimes they're bypassed committees altogether. I'm on economic development, and taxes are the committees I'm on. Just about everything should go through taxes. Some of them should go through multiple times. We saw this where it ends up at the House floor and it skipped committees. That's not a good way to govern. It's not a good way to legislate. When we look at the bills, when we discuss them, when we vote on them on the floor, I always looked at it as not just how it affects my area, but how it affects the other areas of the state as well. Because we have to make good decisions, not just based on what we know, but what the other side looks at, how it affects everybody. It didn't happen this year. That was really a negative thing. I said, how do we represent the people when we're not even communicating back and forth or given the opportunity? But I will say that I think we have one of the greatest opportunities, even with the session, and there's so many bills that a lot of negative connotation, a lot of bad ideas, I feel. I think we have a really good opportunity in this state to win the next session, 2024. As odd as it sounds, it's kind of like, I say it's almost like an addiction. You have to hit rock bottom in order to look up. And I think people in our state are looking at it and saying, the legislation that passed this year, the direction that our state is going is not good. Fourth highest tax state. We're driving people and businesses out of here. A socialist utopia is not what we voted for, but that's the direction we're heading. So when I say about the opportunities, I think people really see what's going on and they want some change. The other thing that I like to point out is the numbers. House of Representatives. The Democrats give this impression that they won the state hands down. It's not the case. Democrats won the House by 4 races. If you add up what they won by on all 4 races, less than 1,500 votes. The Senate, they won the majority, 1 race, less than 500 votes. So when you look at the power in the state, in the House and the Senate, 5 races, less than 2,000 votes decided the power in our state. So do I think we can win it back? Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to work together better, I think, and that's where coming down here and talking this evening, I think is very important. My daughter's probably getting sick of traveling with me. We were up in Wadena earlier this week. Morrison County, we were over there last night, and down here in the metro, because we can win this state if we do a couple things, I feel. First of all, infighting does no good for us. In the House last year, we had 12 primaries where we're fighting amongst ourselves. In my area, it was going to be a Republican one way or another. It is a heavily red district, 76% Republican. We had a primary. If you look at the money across the state that we spent in primaries fighting amongst ourselves, between $750,000 and $1.3 million with outside money. We cannot waste resources. When the Democrats can outspend us 10-1, we need to work together. There's going to be differences in our viewpoints, but we have to take our state back by working together. Whether it's I like to pick on Danny Nadeau. He's a representative in the northwest part of the metro. Danny and I, let me say it this a little bit different. If Danny came up to my area and ran, he probably wouldn't win. But if I came down to Danny's area and run, I probably wouldn't win either. Danny's a little bit more progressive, liberal than I am. And I'm a whole lot more conservative, but when it comes down to very key issues, we're on the same page. We're both Republicans. We have differences, but we got to work together in order to win the state back, and I think we can do it. The other thing that I talk about and promote is an Adopt a Rep program. So I have the numbers on my computer, all of the races that we won by less than 1,000 votes, and I think it was, off the top of my head, I think we had 8 races that we won by less than 1,000 votes. Democrats had like 6 races that they won by less than 1,000 votes. So many of these are so close. So now in a heavily red district like mine, what I can do is look at a race and help a candidate there, a representative, help them. Help them fundraise, help them door knock, help them phone call, whatever it takes to help them get across the finish line. Our BPOUs and the groups there say, what can we do, Mike? Obviously, the money is always the first thing that people talk about, but I think it takes more than that. It takes dedication, it takes some heart. I think hard work can outdo money a lot of times. So people say, well, I don't have a lot of money, and I can't go door knock down in the metro or this area, but what can I do? Do you have family in St. Cloud, Dan Wogemont's area? Well, yeah, I do. Call them. Next election, call them and say, get out and vote. Motivate them to get out. And then follow up and make sure they did get out and vote. We have a lot of ballots left on the table when we're done. We don't turn out like we need to. So there's a lot of opportunities there. The other thing with Adopt a Rep idea is we're told as freshmen coming into the House that it's going to be like drinking water from a fire hose. That is a bad way to step into any position. Being in business, if I tell employees, the first month or two it's going to be like drinking water from a fire hose, they're going to quit. They're going to walk out because they're not prepared, and I am not preparing them for what they're going to be anticipating. In the House, we need to do better as well. That's where that Adopt a Rep once a rep wins in an area, and I've worked with them, there's a connection there, but when they get down to the house, we mentor them, walk them through the process. Bills, you know, the first days when you're kind of wondering where your office is and everything else, help them so that they don't have that drinking from a fire hose experience that so many of us had. We can do better. We need to learn from our mistakes, come up with a plan, and execute the plan. This state is flippable, and it's far closer than what the Democrats make it look. So with that, if there's any particular legislation or questions that you have, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. Yes?
I really appreciate the fact that you're approaching the abortion issue from the standpoint also of the numbers of people and what we're talking about population-wise. Actually, I was aware of the fact that years ago that if you got your population out to about 1.3 or 5, it was done. So we're in deep trouble. I think Elon Musk did a good job of pointing that out, where he talks about we're in a decline. This is not overpopulation whatsoever. And then the other thing I'd just like to ask you, what districts were the ones that were so close that we lost?
I do have those numbers on my computer, and I can give you the district numbers. I don't remember them off the top of my head. There's many in the suburbs. There's also, in greater Minnesota, there's not a lot of the Democrat positions, or Democrat House, I'm sorry. This next cycle is going to be House of Representatives. So 2024, House seats are up. Iron Range, which is Dave Lislegard, up in north of Duluth. Fargo is Heather Keeler. Her race was really close. Jeff Brand is in Mankato. And there was one other one in greater Minnesota that I think are all flippable. Oh, Dan Wogamont, I'm sorry, St. Cloud. So those races in greater Minnesota, the rest of them are basically around the suburbs. So we had a few members ourselves that won by a slight margin. We need to protect them, help them, make sure they get across the finish line. And I can share those numbers with the BPOU. And I actually brought some maps that have the House districts, so you can put a face and a name together. But as far as demographics, I say that numbers make sense to me. Sometimes people confuse the heck out of me, but numbers make sense. Russia had a negative birth rate for a long time, and actually still do. They tried for a long time to raise that birth rate. Hungary has been trying for a very long time too. They stopped the decline, but they have yet to increase the numbers. They're at like 1.7 right now. That's still a negative birth rate. China, as far as their numbers, they had a one-child policy for a long time. What happened is they prioritize boys. The position they're in now is they changed their one-child policy to 2, and now 3. They have an incredibly large percentage of their population that is men, boys. Will never find a spouse. Will never have kids. There's not enough girls, women in the population. They're looking at a drastic decline in their population, and that's why they've increased that 2 to 3 child policy. They know it's coming. Unfortunately, if you have a lot of young, restless males, chaos can ensue. That is a fear that I see. Dissatisfaction in their own country. If China goes into chaos, it will ripple across the whole world. And actually, India is the only one. India just overtook China as far as population. They are increasing. So we've seen that in Europe. Their birth rate was down before the United States. And another number that's kind of interesting, I think, is if you look at the rate, we have a death rate as well as a birth rate, number of people that are dying on a regular basis. That's just ordinary demographics. Even with the influx of illegals coming across the border, we are barely matching the death rate in our country. So imagine what would happen if we didn't have illegals coming in. Those numbers are kind of stark. The other thing that I say is, and it works really good out in our area because you have small towns, right? 3,000, 4,000 people. If the population in Minnesota and greater Minnesota is about 30% elderly, baby boomers, numbers generally 74 life expectancies, 74 for men, 78 for women. We have this baby boomer population that's hitting that arc. Take a third of our population out of a small town there, town of 3,000 people. And then the next 10, 15 years when that baby boomer population is gone, imagine your town and every third house is empty. That's kind of a stark reality. But that's what demographics shows us. That's what the numbers show us. Can you imagine our state right now? 6 million people. And in 15 to 20 years, we would be down to 4 million, roughly a third gone. It's an interesting thought. And that's where demographics, that's where numbers kind of make sense to me. So you had a question, sir?
What's the impact of Minnesota with illegal aliens in it?
I'm sorry, I don't know the numbers as far as illegals coming into the state. Our birth rate as a state is a little bit better than the national average. But the numbers are still, we lost 20,000 people in the state of Minnesota last year. Census tells us that. There are more people that are looking at going out of the state. The other thing that 20,000 number is kind of interesting because you would assume that it's more elderly population going to warmer climates. The 18 to 30 age bracket, we lost almost as much there as we did in the elderly. That's not good because we see money, entrepreneurs, business owners leaving the state for lower taxes, more opportunity. Texas, Florida, Tennessee. I might not be right with Tennessee, but moving out of the state.
All of those don't have income tax.
Exactly. South Dakota, there we go. That's right next door. The growth in South Dakota is phenomenal. If you go down to Sioux Falls, they did not stop building apartments and complexes this winter. Not at all. I go down to South Dakota on a regular basis for business. They're finishing up apartments that they started last summer. They are building, and they're drawing people out of our state. But there was an article somebody had read or wrote, Star and Tribune, about leaving the state. I can't do that. This is my home. I grew up on that family farm where mom lives in the house now. That's home. My dad died there. He's buried in the town 10 miles south. My grandparents are buried in Padua. My great-grandparents are buried in Padua. My great-great-grandparents are buried in Padua. The first Wieners that came over are buried there. This is home. And I'm not going to leave it. I will do everything I can to make sure that my kids get to grow up here in Minnesota. And in central Minnesota especially. When we had our first daughter, I was living in St. Cloud. And my wife was pregnant with our second, and I said, at that time, this is no place to start a family. We need to move back home. She's originally from California, so she's like, Minnesota's all the same, it's all cold, right? But we moved back up there to be by family, to be home. And I am not going to leave this state as we see this progression and the destruction that's we're heading down. So, yes.
I have a question. I watched some of the debates, and it's like not even a single Republican amendment was accepted in this 2040 energy bill, and Then later, like Excel Energy was trying to put electric cars into electric rates without even mandate. And it seems like the media just keeps on celebrating all of this. How do we get it to Democrats who are just watching the liberal media all the time?
Well, I think, like I said before, it's almost like being an addict. You got to hit rock bottom to start looking up. There was an article, and I forget which publication it was, down here in the cities, where they were talking about the electric mandates and the green energy, and they're saying this is not workable. This was a Democrat. I don't remember if it was which one it was, and I apologize. I'm really good at reading stuff, but sometimes giving the reference back to where I read it from. You know, at 2 in the morning when I can't sleep, I forget which paper or which thing I read it on. I think they're seeing some of this. North Dakota is talking about a lawsuit because of the energy bill that was passed in Minnesota here and how it will restrict basically interstate commerce, I believe this is the best way to put it. So they're seeing this. The same energy standards that you have in California will not work in Minnesota. We know this. You know, everything moves on trucks and semis, basically. So what happens when we hit 30 below zero? What do you see? Semis can't even run down the road. Their batteries, and we probably all experienced this at one time or another, you go out when it's really cold, your batteries won't even start your vehicle. How do you expect them to get you anywhere? It doesn't work. In greater Minnesota, the distances that you have to travel. So now, this goes back to that one Minnesota thing. Look at all of the product that comes out of greater Minnesota. All the grain, the egg products, you know, livestock, wood products, mining, minerals. There's just so much of it. It has to come here somehow. It goes through the metro. It's going to get onto rail and go by barges down to the Gulf. You have to get it here. If you're not burning diesel, we don't have the electric semis to do that. We don't have the charging stations in greater Minnesota to charge those semis. So the reality is, and I think people are starting to wake up to it, you can imagine this utopia however you want. The reality is a little bit different, and I think some people are waking up to that. I really do. So like I said, some of those publications are pointing that out. There's good news media. Alpha News, I think, does a really good job. I don't get paid for these endorsements, by the way, but Alpha News, Center for American Experiment, I think does a great job. You know, they're very, very fact-based, which I really like. You know, so when it came to the energy bills, we offered, not just the energy bills, but on so many bills, we offered amendment after amendment after amendment saying just help us make this bill a little bit better, help soften the blow a little bit. I think through the whole session, you could probably count on 2 hands how many amendments they took. And in a way, I say, you own this. This is all yours. If we go to the clean energy utopia that you envision, and people start, unfortunately, freezing to death, because what happens when the power goes out in California? It's 60 degrees and you still lose people there. When it's 0 here and the power goes out, you know, out in greater Minnesota, we deal with this from time to time. It is scary as heck. We have backup. We plan on that. In the metro, you don't have the same thing. I can go and hook up a propane heater in my house and keep my family warm. I plan on that happening. If you have an apartment complex with 4,000 people in it and the power goes out at 30 below, how long will they survive? The Democrats are pushing for this, but really did not think this through. And I do believe there's a lot of people who are opening up their eyes to this. Yes.
They said today on the radio that the electric cars are going to ruin the roads because they're almost twice as heavy as a gas-driven car.
There's obviously some drawbacks. You know, we see the fires, and I don't know the percentage that we see with fires on vehicles, you know, the electric versus gasoline or diesel, but putting those fires out. I believe a car fire, which happens once in a while, takes about 3,000 gallons of water to put that fire out, which sounds like a lot. And EV, I've heard numbers as high as 30,000 gallons to put those fires out. And then they can restart again sometimes by the time they get to the salvage yard or the yard because of the issues there. Now, with any technology, there's going to be some issues. We understand that. But when government compels and pushes these things forward and says this is the only way we can move forward to you know, this utopia, I think that's short-sighted. You know, I look at the technology with hydrogen, and some of the rail companies are saying we can use hydrogen to power our locomotives and have basically zero emissions. But it's not getting subsidized by the government, because they have said that the only way to move forward in clean energy is wind and solar. That's not accurate. So moving forward, yes, we have obstacles.
I think in Texas, the storm wiped out all of the solar panels down there.
How,
I think with this last one, and it's 110 degrees down there. But it wiped out the whole field.
okay, I know which one I think you're
It was
referring to.
just the other day.
A hailstorm, right? Yep, and all the panels are shot. Yep.
You mentioned that all these people are moving out of Minnesota, and you can't get it.
No,
If you want an abortion, you can come to Minnesota. If you want to change your sex, come to Minnesota. We need to raise gas prices. These schools are nuts, you know? It's crazy here.
there's definitely issues, but I also look at what we always call the silent majority.
Right, but
We are not
where did that
speaking,
get us? We didn't
we are
listen
not
for
speaking up
this.
enough. We are not voicing our opinion on some of these issues, or many of these issues.
How can that change? How can the message get out more so that the
We'll support some of those like Alpha News, Center for American Experiment, and there's other ones. Support them. Messaging, I know a lot of people use Facebook. I am not a big Facebook user. It's just not my thing. But talking to people goes a long ways. Do the research, figure these things out for yourself, and then spread the word, you know? And don't be afraid to voice your opinion. You know, we've been told for a long time, when you get together for Thanksgiving, don't talk about religion and don't talk about politics. And I say the exact opposite. Those are the two most influential things in our lives. Talk about religion. Talk about politics. Talk about why these things are important, because our future generations need to hear these things. We need to discuss them. Yes?
The Center for the American Experiment and Alpha News is excellent news source, but I just wonder, a lot of people who are Democrats, like I have Democrat friends that they'll only watch CNN or they'll watch, you know, like 5 News or something like that. And if they don't see it on that, they don't get the message, or they sometimes don't even believe me.
Pretty hard to change somebody's mind that doesn't want to listen. But like I talked about the numbers with the elections and how close those are. When it comes to election, you have your base on both sides, Republican, Democrat. The people in the middle are the ones that are the independents, the different groups that are out there, libertarian, whatever. Those are the ones that you need to reach. Those are the ones, that's the 500 people in St. Cloud that can flip that race. That's I'm trying to remember which that other race was, 200 people. Those are the people you need to talk to. So, go back to a Bible story that says, don't cast your pearls before swine. Don't waste your time. If somebody does not want to listen, doesn't want to have an open discussion, don't get frustrated. Find somebody that does. There's people out there that are willing to listen. Talk to them. Discuss it with them. Yeah.
Next door is one of our go-tos, and there's a lot of information that flows back and forth around your neighborhood and beyond. So next door would be a good way to go, and you heard me say this about Twitter, sorry, but Twitter's my thing, I go to it, and I've seen both Democrat, Republican, mostly Democrat stuff coming across
Yeah.
on Twitter, and those Gen Zers are into Twitter, that's that younger group, the Democrats are going after in particular right now too, so.
Very true.
Just left too. You have to be careful. You'll get banned from that. I'm permanently banned from it.
Which one?
Next door.
I'm not even sure what that is.
This bad, I
They don't want you to
figured I'd get-
Because I had
Okay.
Trump signs in the 5-city area, and I said free Trump signs.
Yeah.
They banned me permanently.
Sure.
Interesting.
careful.
Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
had Biden signs up, I bet they
Oh,
would.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But those conversations, you have coffee in the morning, sit down at the local cafe up in our area, it happens all the time, and have those conversations. And if you disagree with someone, voice your opinion. The other thing that's really good about that is once you have to argue a point, you understand better why you feel a certain way, why you think this is a good thing. And if you don't have a good answer, go figure it out. There's times when I instinctively go, I don't like this. I don't necessarily know why I don't like this, but I don't like this. And then I go to read. And then I study. And I can't get to bed until 3, 4 in the morning. But I need that answer. Then I go, that's why. Educate yourselves. There's so much opportunity out there now. I like podcasts personally. I listen to the Daily Wire on a regular basis. Michael Knowles, Dennis Prager, Ben Shapiro. I like that. I think those are very educational, different viewpoints, very conservative. It's actually one of the fastest growing forget what they consider themselves, but huge amount of followers, just keeps growing. You know, and people, I think, like I said, you have to hit rock bottom to turn your life around, so to speak. We're seeing that in education. Somebody brought that up before, the problems in the public schools. You know, COVID brought a lot of those things to the forefront and people's attention to it, you know, what's being taught in the school. We homeschool our kids. We had them in private school to begin with. I saw education, it's kind of unique, from 3 different viewpoints. I saw it in private. My folks had us in private school until 6th grade. I went to public school after that. 1 year, and I don't remember if we were moving or what the deal was, but they homeschooled me for 1 year. And that was a good year. And then I went back to public school and I transferred actually to a different school after that. So I saw education from 3 different forms. And I said, when we have kids, I want to make sure they get the best education that they can. Some of our kids have spent time in different religious schools, boarded for a time. Because sometimes, and I am not a big fan of boarding, to be honest with you. I believe that the parents decide what's best for their kids. I don't like giving up that parental responsibility. I always argued against it, but I saw in 2 of my kids, they needed something that I could not necessarily give them all the time. And that structure in a school with many different students, they needed that. So they tried it. They both ended up coming home after a time, but they experienced it. And all of a sudden, you know, they viewed life a little bit different. So I think it was a good experience. You had a question, sir?
In the House, is there a caucus of constitutional conservatives? In what percentage, we'll say of the Republicans in the House, would belong to that block of constitutional conservatives?
As far as the Republican side, the caucus is all the same right now. There is no individuals or small group that is a independent caucus or a constitutional caucus. There was a group last session. There was about 4 legislators that formed their own caucus. 2 of them are in the Senate now. There's some fracture and there's some issues with that. I've always considered myself more of a constitutional conservative. I believe our founding fathers did an amazing job with the Constitution. I like history. When you look at what the signers went through, when you sign that paper, you were basically committing treason against England. That was serious. They dedicated everything to that. So I know there's many of us that look at through the constitutional lens. Omnibus bills in the state of Minnesota. Our state constitution says a bill has to be single item bills, and the title has to be part of the bill. An omnibus bill is lumping all these bills together. That is a terrible way to legislate. Part of what we need to do is we need to educate not just the people we represent, but other representatives as well, because we're all coming from different places. The Constitution is there, but when you discuss omnibus bills, this is the way it's been done for a long time. And some people say, well, how are you going to govern without omnibus bills? We did it. Our state did it for 150 years. We have to get back to that. So what we did up in our area for family, friends, people who were running for office, we took Hillsdale College, their online course, and we had a group, met at my house. It was great. It was so educational. That's something we can promote in our members. There's 25 freshman members in the house this year, and I think many of them are excited. Many of them are learning these steps too, learning the problems in the process, like omnibus bills. And I think, I'm excited about the new members because they're questioning things. Why do we do it this way?
Do not care. They are driven by an ideology, and they have no representation or affinity for truth whatsoever. So the only way that we are going to get our share, which I do believe that the silent majority is more conservative than what we see, but we're not talking, we're suppressed. You know, and I talk to most of the people, and I find like-minded people talking to me, but I just talked to a friend of mine yesterday. I couldn't believe it. What, so indoctrinated into the leftist view, and he's, you know, watching the TV station and all that. The only way you're going to get through them is honestly by political force, and that means, you know, being in unity, being about a particular principle, following that through, not really negotiating, because you've got people on the other side that are just going to negotiate you further and further left. You're just going to give up a little more territory. But you have to have the political power to do that, and you have to have the kind of people that resonate with the truth, with the foundations of this country, with the backbone of America, with the people that made America what it was, not what it is today.
So you used an interesting term there, and it's something that I'm kind of glad you brought up, is principles. Has anybody read Ayn Rand or watched the movie Atlas Shrugs? There's a part in there, and I love this part of the movie. But the government guy goes to this manufacturer. He's got the magic steel formula, makes the trains run on frictionless steel, basically. And the government guy is trying to get the formula for the steel, right? And the guy will not budge. And the government guy says, the problem with you is you're stuck with your rigid principles. And the guy says, you try pouring a ton of steel without rigid principles. I love that line. Principles is our foundation, it's our bedrock. Early on in the session, somebody said to me, Mike, this business, or politics is all about relationships. And I said, that may be, but it should be about principles. I'm opposed to omnibus bills because they're unconstitutional. There could be really good things in there. I can't compromise my principles. And I think once you have more people standing up, it's It's almost contagious. But you have to have those discussions, because how many people even know what principles even are? When I sat in the House and we're sitting in the chamber, we're discussing a tax bill and spending. That particular bill, I think, was $3-4 billion, and that to me is an astronomical number. And I always ask people, how many zeros are there in a billion? Very few can answer me. We almost can't comprehend. But up on top, one of the words in the quote from, it's not Thomas Jefferson, I apologize, frugality. Here we are discussing a bill of billions of dollars, and it says government should be based in frugality. How many people even know what that word meant? And it's written right above our heads on the floor. We have become complacent. The reason we're in the problems that we have the problems that we are now, and myself included, I voted every election when I was from 18 on. I helped put those people in office, and I said, you know what you're doing. I never checked back up on them again. You're seeing this more, where people will say, why did you vote this way on this bill? And legislators, senior legislators, say that didn't used to happen before. So the people themselves, I believe this change needs to be grassroots. It needs to start from the bottom. Do we need to hold our legislators accountable? Absolutely. That's part of the process. Yes, sir.
Very recently, we've been listening to a lot of the problems that have been created for businesses.
Yes.
And they're implementing some July 1st, I think some August 1st. Do you have any comment on that part of it?
We discussed the family medical leave quite a bit on the floor. I discussed, as a business owner, if you look at the statistics, the number of small businesses that start and hire people across the country is huge. 500 and under, according to the Small Business Administration, is considered a small business. And I think they employ something like 33 million people across the United States. Small businesses do. When you put more restrictions, more challenges in front of those entrepreneurs, it only makes it harder for them. And we discussed this on the floor, and I tried to get the point across many times. We're spending money to support BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And economic development, this discussion was on many, many times, where we want to help minorities or different groups. And I am all in favor of leveling a playing field if it's uneven. But then we put hurdles in front of all these people that want to start a business. It makes no sense. I think what's going to happen, and I think there's pretty good reason when you see like the lawsuit with North Dakota about the power coming across. I think over the next year to 2 years, we're going to be working to unmess some of the messes that were legislated this last session. I think when it comes to like the family medical leave, there should be a carve out, and I hope there will, so that small businesses can get their feet under them and get going. The tax issue, the states around us are talking about cutting their taxes. I think eventually the state here in Minnesota, the other thing is the projected budget. We've been meeting or surpassing the tax income or revenue coming into the state until, was it April or May? Now all of a sudden we're not hitting that budget. They're talking about a recession. Okay? Budget office has mentioned that many times. Once that reality kicks in, I think there's going to be some people that say, oh no, what did we just do? Because life is really good when you got a $20 billion, $19.5 billion surplus. But once the coffers are dry, then we start reevaluating, and people say, oh no. I compare that surplus to winning the lottery. I said the Democrats came into this session with the trifecta, November 8th, House, Senate, governorship, and they had a $17.5 billion surplus at that time. It was just like winning the lottery. Unfortunately, what happens with the vast majority of lottery winners? They go bankrupt within 5 years. I'm afraid our state is heading that direction. I hope common sense, I hope business owners, you know, like I mentioned before, there was the one business owner that wrote to the Star and Tribune and said, this is bad. You're going to drive businesses out of the state. I hope more businesses stand up and say, we need some common sense here. Mayo Clinic did that. And the legislation kind of veered the other direction. So when I talk about the grassroots pushing back, I think that's where we need to emphasize. So,
How about college debt?
if you want to start a business, you take out a loan and you're responsible to pay that loan back. As a college student, you took responsibility. You went to get an education. I did just as well. I went to St. Cloud. I went to St. Cloud Tech, it's technical college. I went to 2 years sales management, business management. When I left, I had a small student loan. I worked full-time. I don't believe that I need to pay for somebody else to go to college. It's a decision you made. It's a responsibility. We need to grow up and be responsible for our decisions.
The next thing will be a free house.
Sure, and we're sliding into socialism when everything's free. But we are getting a little bit long. I think we should probably wrap it up. But thank you very much.